Good morning, friends. It's so great to see all of you today. They say that confession is good for the soul. And so I'm going to start with a couple of confessions to you this morning. The first confession is this. I'm kind of struggling to stand up here and preach to you all today because I made a very poor decision at the Pumpkin Festival on Friday night. I thought it would be a good idea to do the potato sack race, which ended this way with me lying on the ground. And it might not look like that should have hurt, but I'm not as young as I once was. And so I'm in a little bit of pain. But other than that, it was a fantastic night. We have no idea how many people were actually here. Our estimates range from 200 to 350 to 2 million people. We really don't know. What we do know is that the parking lot was overflowing and that there were kids absolutely all over the place. It was such an honor to get to interact and meet so many of our neighbors. And so I just want to say thank you this morning to all of you who made this great event happen, not just for our church family, but for our entire community. That's my first confession. I'm just not as young as I used to be. I'm coming to terms with that, all right? But my second confession might be a little surprising to you all. Many of you know me for quite some time, and you know I tend to be a cautious person, a person who likes to play by the rules, who doesn't like to cause a ruckus or ruffle any feathers, who doesn't really like to stand out all that much. But would you believe that I am actually the black sheep of my family? I know, it's surprising. But let me show you my family tree, and in quite a few moments, I think you'll be able to see what makes me feel like the odd person out who's gone against the grain. This is my family tree. And at the top, you can see that my great-grandfather was a school superintendent. You can see that my grandmother was a teacher in a 2-room schoolhouse back in the day. Both my parents were high school teachers, along with most all of my aunts and uncles, who you can see on either side. My only sister, Jacqueline, she is an elementary school teacher. And then there's me, the lone pastor in the family tree. I have to tell you guys, it caused a little bit of anxiety when I decided to go into ministry. And it's true, Mom and Dad, they're back here if they can attest to this. Because, this was the family tradition, the family trade, the family business that I was kind of walking away from in this moment. We, the Sparks family, and teaching, we went together like peanut butter and jelly. We had connections and we were respected in that profession. We knew what to expect and what was expected of us. And he says I would have been a good coach too. That was another part of that tradition up there. But, going into ministry was this whole new, uncertain territory that none of us knew what to look out for. And so it brought with it all these questions, all these concerns. And so for me, it was very, very difficult to walk away from the family business. I think that's probably why I have such a soft spot for the 2 disciples who we find at the center of this story with Jesus. They too were black sheep who walked away from the family business. If we go all the way back to the opening chapter of Mark, we find James and John working right alongside their father Zebedee, doing the same job that they have always done, and that who knows how many generations of their ancestors has done before them. They're being fishermen on the Sea of Galilee, which is, it came with some nice scenery, to be sure, but this was a hard-working job. The way that this typically worked is that several boats of men would go out together, and they would do so at night. They would cast their net between those boats to try to catch as many fish as they could, and they'd do it at night so that the fish wouldn't see the net that was there. And then they had to haul in those fish again and again and again. And then when daylight finally came, their job wasn't done. They didn't get to just go home. They had to go and they had to sort out their fish so that they could take them to sell, and then they had to mend their nets so that they would be ready for them to go out and do the same thing all over again. This was pretty difficult labor that they had to do. But before you go and start feeling really, really bad for these fishermen, here's what you need to know. At this point in time, fishing was a booming business there on the Sea of Galilee. The people who were ruling at the time, they were investing heavily in this industry. They created this very, very calm environment in which it could grow and expand. The fish that these guys were catching were getting sold all across the Roman Empire. And so James and John, they were likely doing pretty well for themselves. The family business was not a struggle. It was a very safe place for them, a safe place where they knew what they were doing because it was what they had always known. And they were doing it in the place that they had always known. And they were doing it with the people that they'd always known as well. However, one day after a long night of fishing, along came this rabbi named Jesus. And Jesus did something highly unusual. He called them to become his disciples. Normally, this happened the other way around. Normally, a person who wanted to become a disciple went and sought the rabbi out. And at that time, the rabbi would ask them all kinds of questions to see if they made the cut to become a part of their posse, right? A part of the group that would follow him around. But in this situation, that doesn't happen. In this situation, Jesus is the one who calls these brothers, and he doesn't ask them a single question. Instead, he calls, and immediately they take action. Immediately, they drop their nets, and they go and they follow Jesus, leaving their dad, Zebedee, sitting there right there in the boat with all of his hired hands. We don't get Zebedee's reaction, but wouldn't that be fun to have that here, right? Like, at the very least, we know that Zebedee is being left shorthanded. And at the most, he is absolutely devastated that these sons of his that he's invested in all this time, who he expects to take on the family business, they've just abandoned him. We have to remember that this culture, they highly valued honoring your parents. And so you didn't just walk away from the family business. Now, Mark's gospel, it quickly moves on from there. You know, we got to get on to the miracles and to the teachings of Jesus, and we watch the disciples follow him all around. But I want us to really pause here and take in the gravity of what James and John have just done. They have just made this life-altering decision that is going to take the trajectory of their lives in a totally different direction. There was no pro and con list that has been made here, right? There is no risk analysis that's been conducted. There is no strategic plan that has been enacted. No, there's only been this action. And so where are my cautious people in the room, my planners in the room? Are you breaking out in hives and starting to hyperventilate, right? Because in the blink of an eye, they have abandoned the safe life that they have spent their entire lives developing. In a matter of moments, they have literally walked away from this safe life that they've always known into this sea of uncertainty. Now, you might be thinking, but Laura, it was Jesus, so of course you would just drop everything and follow him. But we have the benefit of hindsight. We know how this story turns out. These guys are jumping in at the very beginning of the story. And here's my question. Why? Why just throw caution to the wind and leave the family business? You know, they've taken this big gamble to follow him and left all this safety behind. And I don't think it's really until Mark chapter 10 that we start to be clued in and get a glimpse of the motivation that was behind why they took this risk on Jesus. This is what it says in verse 35. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him. Teacher, they said, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. What do you want me to do for you? He asked. They replied, let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in glory, power, position, prestige. James and John, they were looking for something much more than that safe life that they had cultivated there on the seashore. They wanted a spectacular life instead. You know, who among us hasn't desired that? A spectacular life. This usually starts when we're children. Maybe it was back in elementary school when you grew out that rat tail so that everyone would notice you. Your worship leader, Jeremy, did that. And there's photographic evidence somewhere. And I tried to find it, and I couldn't find it for you today. Or maybe it was when you tried to tease your bangs out taller than everyone else in your class. Guilty as charged. Maybe it was by trying to be at the top of your class or being the class clown. But you know what? We don't grow out of this. This is something that continues on into adulthood. It just changes what our goal is, right? And so maybe as you've gotten older, your goal has been to get as many credentials behind your name as you possibly can. Or maybe it's to get that corner office. Maybe you've tried to distinguish yourself by being the hardest worker or the most committed parent or the person with the craziest calendar or the fittest or the fastest or the coolest or the calmest, the whateverist. The truth of the matter is, all of us do this. All of us are tempted to pursue a spectacular life that sets us apart from everyone else. And James and John were no exception. They were human, just like us. And it seems as they took off from that safe shore that they were hoping Jesus was indeed going to lead them somewhere spectacular, that he was going to lead them straight to the top, that they were about to distinguish themselves above and beyond everyone else. However, I have to wonder, as they went along on this journey with Jesus, if they ever began to wrestle, if they ever began to doubt, if they ever began to wonder, was it worth it? Was it worth it to leave behind the safety of the family business to follow Jesus? Was he going to deliver this spectacular life that they hoped for? I tend to think that they did wrestle with this. In fact, it's very interesting to me, the timing of when these two brothers come to Jesus and make this request of him. You see, Jesus has just predicted to his disciples for the third time that he is about to suffer and to die. And to be honest, this really didn't line up with this idea of the Messiah that the disciples and others thought that Jesus had come to be. The Messiah that was going to come and throw out their enemies and set up the kingdom of Israel where he would rule and reign with peace and justice. How is he supposed to do that if he's dead? And so, there had been other people that had come along that claimed to be the Messiah, and none of them had lived up to the hype. All of them had ended up in a grave as well. And so here's James and John hearing Jesus talk about death when everything had been going well, everything had been moving in this spectacular direction. Jesus is going around. He's bringing hope and healing all over the place. Masses of people are following him around. And so why is he talking about dying? This had to be so disorienting for James and for John. In their minds, Jesus is supposed to be moving toward a throne, not toward crucifixion, not toward a grave with a stone. And so how could they not wonder? How could they not question if they had made the right decision? How could they not wonder if it had been worth it to leave their safe life to pursue this spectacular one? It seems to me that this anxiety is what prompts them to come to Jesus and make this request. They need to know, hey, Jesus, is this plan still headed where we think that it is? Are we still moving towards something spectacular? Are we still on track? And not only do they want to know if they're on track, they want to make sure that they've really secured their position. They want to make sure that they have a spectacular spot when Jesus' kingdom comes. And so they come right out and they ask Jesus for what they want. They say, let one of us sit at your right and the other one at your left in your glory. In other words, we want to be second in command, Jesus, right? We want the best seats in the kingdom. We want the exalted positions that carry additional powers and privileges. Essentially, James and John are trying to call shotgun in Jesus' kingdom. We all do this when we go to the car, right? Especially if we're going on a long trip. No one wants to sit in the back seat. And so what do? You call shotgun. Even when your legs are as short as mine, like sitting in the back seat's not fun. But beyond that, when you ride shotgun, you get to sit right next to the driver and you get to share a little bit of their power, right? Because you're closest to the controls. You get to pick maybe what's playing on the radio, and you get to adjust the volume, and you get to make sure the temperature's just the way that you like it. Riding shotgun comes with some privileges. You are second in command in the kingdom that is the car. And that's what James and John are longing for in this moment. They want to be spectacular, even amongst all the other disciples. They want to be at the pinnacle of the kingdom when that kingdom comes. It's a bit presumptuous of them, right? But I love Jesus' reply to this. He doesn't scold them. He doesn't just reject them and say, get out of here. Why would you even ask something like that? He doesn't call them selfish. There's no shame that he tries to cast upon them. No, he simply says, you don't know what you are asking. And I think that's Jesus' response to so many of our requests as well. When we come to Jesus, we can't help but to bring with us our own idea of what spectacular looks like. And so we bring that idea of what looks spectacular to us, and we ask God to just bless what we think is best. And we come and we ask him to just give us whatever it is that we want, just like James and John. However, we forget that Jesus, he has this whole big picture, and we only see this little slice. James and John, they think that restoring the little kingdom of Israel is what Jesus is shooting for. That's what Jesus is trying to do. And they can't imagine anything more spectacular than that. But what Jesus has in mind is nothing short of bringing redemption to the whole entire world. And he has in mind to do that in a way that these disciples never could have possibly dreamt up. They don't know what they are asking. But Jesus, he knows what he wants to ask of them. And so he asks them, can you drink the cup I drink, or be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with? The cup symbolizes the blood that Jesus is about to shed in his crucifixion. And the baptism he speaks of is the waters of death that he's about to go down in. And so Jesus, what he wants to know is if James and John are willing to follow him there. He wants to know if they are willing to suffer, if they are willing to sacrifice, if they are willing to serve and give their lives for others, because that is what spectacular looks like in Jesus' kingdom. Indeed, at the very end of this passage, Jesus, he explains this further, because the other 10 disciples, they've heard about this request of James and John. And I think the way that the NIV put it was they were indignant. I have to wonder if maybe it was like jealous as well, like, oh man, they beat me to the punch. But regardless, Jesus wants to make this crystal clear to all of them what it is that they're aiming for. And so in verse 42, he says, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. We tend to think that power, position, and prestige is what is going to make our lives matter, just like James and John. That it's finally going to be the thing that will deliver us the fulfillment that we long for, that it will make us spectacular. But Jesus makes it clear that true greatness actually lies in a very unexpected place, in becoming not spectacular, but in becoming the servant of all. What this world would consider to be of the highest value, Jesus, he takes it and he completely flips it upside down. You know, what the world would consider weakness, being a servant, Jesus calls that strength. What the world would call foolishness, slaves being first, Jesus, he calls that wisdom. What the world would deem a failure, losing your life, Jesus deems that as victorious. Is it really any wonder, though, that James and John are having trouble wrapping their minds around such a radical reversal? You know, it's something that confounds us still 2,000 years later. But eventually, these two brothers, they are going to get it. They are going to get it as they keep following Jesus. And not only are they going to get it, they're going to drink from that same cup as Jesus. And they are going to be baptized with his baptism. James, he goes on to become the very first of the disciples who's put to death for his commitment and his service to Jesus and others. King Herod has him put to death by the sword. And then John, he lived much longer than his brother, but he faced suffering of all sorts. He was banished to an island and eventually put to death as well. It certainly wasn't the spectacular life that these brothers had in mind whenever they left that safe life on the seashore, asked to be second in command. But you know what? After living through all of that, after having gotten to walk alongside Jesus, after getting to witness his death and his resurrection, after being filled with the Holy Spirit, after getting to be a part of God's kingdom, literally breaking out right here on earth and bringing hope and healing to absolutely everyone, I have no doubt that as they reached the end of their lives, they looked back and they said, it was worth it, more than worth it, to follow Jesus. What about us today? You know, maybe you find yourself standing on some safe shore, hearing Jesus inviting you to follow him in one way or another. And you just aren't so sure. You know, it feels pretty risky to leave behind the comforts and the confidence and the control of what you've always known to follow him, because who knows where he might take you. Or maybe you find yourself pretty caught up in trying to build a spectacular life for yourself. And you just can't imagine what would happen if you suddenly stopped striving to stand out. Because who in the world might you be then? But through the story of James and John, what we discover is that the risk is worth the reward. A safe life will only take us so far, and it will always leave us wondering, what if? What if we would have stepped out there? A spectacular life in the eyes of this world, it's always this moving target. It's here today and gone tomorrow. It just leaves us worn out and longing for more. However, a life of service to and for and with Jesus is where we discover the full, abundant life that we were always made for. The full and abundant life for which we long. The full and abundant life that Jesus laid down his life to make possible.